Hi, I'm Lou. I am a IB coordinator in Houston, Texas. I've taught in a variety of international schools as well. I want to start off by sharing with you the platform that I put up on the resources link. This will support what we're going to be doing. So you just need to go to this session and click on the link. I'll also put the link into the chat room a bit later. Here are some resources that will guide you through agency as well as inquiry. I've also partnered with a planning platform called Toddle, and they've taken some of my resources to create inquiry in a blended learning environment, as well as some of my contact details. So if you haven't had a chance to get the Padlet, I definitely invite you to do that. Um, so we have about 15 people here. Can you just say in the chat room where you're from? It's just so that we can get to know everyone and where you're coming from. All right, so we have, wow, so we have someone from Thailand. Welcome, Kirsten. We have Monterey, California versus Monterey, in Mexico, Brazil, Santo Domingo, Alberta. I used to live in Alberta. Hello. Um, so glad to see you here today. So this has been a passion project of mine. As we've gone into the pandemic, something that I've seen a lot happening is teachers are struggling with how do they make inquiry happen in a blended or a virtual learning platform. Even if we're face to face, it's a little stilted because we're having to physically distance. So how do we utilize agency to bring that inquiry back? So we're going to start off with folding into inquiry. So I'm going to stop my screen share. Sorry. Can you all hear me? Brilliant. All right, so some things that I feel like really help students at this time is doing things with their hands because they're not being able to engage with each other, is sitting next to each other oftentimes. And so here's some things that I'm going to put up onto my website that can possibly help with that. So one thing that I've used since my first year of teaching is using these types of foldable types of devices to get kids learning. I've used them with science. I've done them with, this one is on poetry, ways to get kids to interact and to stimulate their thinking. Another thing that's been really fabulous is this is one of my favorites. It's called a Flexagon. It's literally a single piece of paper. Have any of you heard about these before? Have you used any of these? Brilliant. All right, and I love a Flexagon because this is definitely a surprise. Now, this Flexagon, I'll zoom in a little bit. I created it in relation to instead of doing a plot diagram, getting kids to engage with learning. And the first one is a teacher model, but then the second one, which comes here, which is a magic window, is the student. So it's a bit of a formative assessment, and so it keeps going, okay? But what's also nice is that you don't have to do it so formulaic. You can also do it with, so here's one with science that I've done, dealing with the relationship between rapid change and slow change. Okay, oops, I just took something here. And then, so this is one that I want to work on today. Really simple. All you need is, if you want to do it with me, is all you need is a simple sheet of paper, okay? And all you have to do is fold it in half. That's it. Okay. And then I live near Mexico, so we call this a burrito fold. Some people might call it, if you're in the Middle East, a shawarma fold. And so you're just going to come here and you're going to do a trifold so that it comes here. So that at the end you have 6 rectangles that open up. And for us today, what we're going to do is put a line down the middle and then just put, sorry, trying to get this here, agency at the top, and then inquiry in the middle at the bottom. And what it can possibly look like is something like this, where it takes and it pops out and it folds out to be like this. Okay, so these are different things that you can do. So if you want to, I know in a lot of online workshops, for myself, I'm chatting in the chat room and then it ends and then all of my good ideas go with it. So I thought a fun little way to capture your ideas if you want to do that with me. Okay, so I'm in the process right now of getting that together with some directions, and I'll be putting that up within the next couple of weeks, the directions on how to do all of those. So what does agency mean? When we're thinking about agency, it's when you own the learning experience. So I want you to just write down for yourself, when was the first time where you truly owned the learning experience? So for me, I hate to admit it, but I was very an introverted student. I didn't speak up, so I didn't advocate for myself. But I would say that probably the first time for me was when I went and I was actually close to finishing up university. I went to Melbourne University in Melbourne, Australia. And it was at that time that I had a lot of freedom to explore the things that I was interested in. And I remember at that time, becoming an educator was still formulating, because my mom was a teacher, that I thought to myself at that time that a person shouldn't have to wait till a university to be able to be an agent of their own learning experience. And so I've done a lot of self-reflection into agency and what does that look and feel like. And this visual really has helped me to understand what that is. I'm just going to stop looking at the chat. Agency is the lens at which we look at a student. Are they young, capable people that have the power within themselves to self-initiate their learning? And then if we look at that relationship with inquiry, then inquiry is all those sea of possibilities. It's that physical manifestation of that agency coming to life. So there are 3 parts to agency, and I'd like you to drop down where you think your strength is. So we first have voice. Are you allowing your students to have active voice in what they're learning? So are they sharing their ideas of how they want to contribute to the learning in the classroom? Are they being able to share their ideas with each other and shape a little bit of the learning experience? How about choice? Are you providing some choices for your students so that they are feeling empowered in the learning process? Or do you provide them some ownership where they feel like they can make some of their own decisions? So why don't you take a second right now to jot down, which area do you think you are the strongest? Voice, choice, or ownership? Does anyone want to share where they think they are the strongest? Okay, so let me see. So ownership, voice. Okay, voice seems to be resonating here. Okay, and choice. Okay, brilliant. So in regards to this is I think, an evolving process. I think as an educator who's been doing this for a little bit, it has taken. I don't have this all mastered, because we have outside pressures coming at us, and sometimes things, we have curriculum guidelines, we have different things that are straining us. So, how do we then offer a little bit more opportunity for student agency? So, that's what we're going to talk about and do. So, I'm going to get rid of myself. Here is a voice continuum, a possible voice continuum. So when I'm thinking about a continuum, I'm thinking about these two over here being more teacher driven, okay, where children can speak their ideas, they can share, participate in group discussions, they can even make some connections, piece some ideas together. But those ideas are driven by the teacher, solely by getting the children to, you're trying to get a pulse of what students can do. But then when we're looking in the middle in the yellow section, we're looking at, okay, this is where we're kind of modeling and guiding in the process and releasing a little bit control, where children are now becoming a team player, they're collaborating with each other. They're also becoming a co-creator because they're working with you to co-create some learning activities. And then over here on the right, you've got ways that children are now driving the learning process, either by advocating or leading. Excuse me. Now we have a choice continuum. We have, oops, sorry about that. So the choice continuum is that the learner participates in the process. The teacher is driving everything. The teacher is choosing all the activities and choosing the thinking. Then we have engage, where the teacher provides those resources, but the students get to have a little bit of choice. Then we go to choose, where really the students are more actively choosing the ideas to explore. This is where we're starting to see more student initiation and learner-driven thinking. Still could be very much modeled and guided at this point. Then at create, the learner creates for themselves. They're really starting to take risks and ownership. And where we would eventually like them to be is innovate, where they're designing the processes and the products of their learning. And I think with voice and choice, there's a little tangible steps. There's things that we can do as educators. We're like, yeah, I can help them create a little bit more products. But the part that I found was really challenging for me, as I've been looking into agency, is ownership, because ownership requires us to really, it's like a gut feeling of students that they've got it, that they understand the learning process and they understand how all the inner workings go together. So first, you start off with compliance, where students are engaged because they want to get a grade. They want to do for you. They don't want to do for them. The commitment piece is when they want to start doing for themselves. They're starting to put pieces together. They're connecting with prior learning. And then when we come over here to connection, they're developing, skills with others. They're collaborating, but they're also building relationships with ideas, so that they can finally come down here to creation, where they're creating for themselves. This is where you have students where you've been engaged in a unit, and they go home on the weekend and create a project and are so proud to bring it, to share it with you. That's creation. So now that we've had a chance to talk about it a little bit more in depth, where do you think you truly are now? All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go into some breakout groups. We're going to take a look at how do we do this in step-by-step way. We're going to look at what's called a success criteria. So there's been a lot of work in the past couple of years of trying to help kids make goals with success criteria. So I look at success criteria as kind of like a pool of the targeted behavior. So for in this visual right here are possible ways that you can invite agency or not invite agency into your classroom. It's about how you structure it. Are you co-creating the structure with students, or are you designing everything? It's the relationships. Who are you putting together into groups and who are you not? Are you making it homogeneous grouping or heterogeneous? It's about the collaboration piece with the students interacting with you with ideas. It's also the resources and then how the learning environment is designed. So we're going to take about 8 minutes into breakout rooms. And I want you to talk about what are the areas do you think are your strengths, and what are areas that might need to be growth areas, but maybe dialogue with each other of how you can make this tangible. Okay, so we're going to go into those breakout rooms for about 8 minutes.
I'm going to send everyone now to a group, so here we go.
All right, welcome back. So would anyone mind sharing some of the ideas that you guys talked about? No?
No.
Okay, yes. Okay,
I'd like to bring up something that Georgina talked about in our group, and it's like very specific to science. She works in the science lab supporting teachers. And there were a couple of things. That one is like the tension between the amount of time we have and that allowing that exploration. It's kind of, it's like fear driven. So because we're afraid we might not get there, then we don't allow the exploration time. We want to control it. Because she was talking, and Georgina, feel free to drop in at any time, but she was talking about the fact that the teachers want everything to be very like linear and organized, and that's something I worked a lot with teachers in the science lab too, and that's something that I really recognized. But what I found was that when we allowed the children to set up their own criteria, which is something that somebody else in our chat room was talking about as well, and develop their own experiments, their learning was exponentially greater. So like once we released that fear and stopped trying to control the direction, we actually saw greater learning growth. But it's a question of like, when you're being really pressurized and feeling that you're being measured by standards, how do you support people in letting go? That was kind of the themes that came up.
And I think that's a universal theme, whether you're in a public or state school or private, international. There's so much this drive for you to cover the content, right? And to make sure that the students master. But how are we doing that? Because are we just pushing content? Because if we are just pushing the content, then what happens is then the students don't learn anything. They don't retain it. And then the following year, you get the grade level team after you saying, well, what did you teach last year? I've had those conversations many of times. These children don't know how to do fractions. It's because they didn't understand it. Felipe, what were you going to, did you want to say something?
Well, just like when this started, and I was telling Michelle that I kind of immediately saw that I am very teacher-centric with my IB history class. And this is because I am still moving from compliance, because this is only my second class that I teach. I'm moving from compliance to having myself a little more agency, and thereby kind of passing it on to my students. And I finally kind of loved that I mean, I do rafts, but it's always like the content is always dictated by me. content is content is prescriptive because it's an IB subject, but then calendars and every format and like all the like it's just everything seems to revolve like it all comes from me, especially since we've gone virtual.
Mhm.
But there was a glimmer of hope in that I saw that last week I gave a project that without thinking about this, without having all these things in my mind, I wanted them to become more engaged. So I gave them a lot of choice.
Mhm. And I think it's just the little things because I think a lot of even seasoned IB practitioners, as we pivoted towards this platform and having to teach virtually, it's been a struggle. How do you keep kids engaged? How do you keep them curious about the content? And sometimes it's easier to do more of those traditional tasks. Okay, here's the activity, go do your asynchronous research, come back, right? And you're nodding because, but we also have to be kind to ourselves that we've had to massively pivot and we've had to change everything we do. So now that we're in it a year, how do we claim it back, right? So that we don't go so far from that rabbit hole that we don't make it back. That's my main thing, right? And that's why I've been curious about this inquiry. This has been my inquiry. So I've been trying to find ways that we can come back to the heart of what we do as practitioners. So I love this suggestion about creating students creating the success criteria, because the students, if they create the success criteria, more than likely they're going to follow it because it's from their heart. So, because I knew that there would be a span of grade levels and whatnot, I've started off with something that's in the early years, like let's make it also age specific, right? And also that students are going to buy into. So if you look at this success criteria, and this is based off of many of the principles that come from what we talked about earlier, right? I can make connections. I can lead a group. These are things that we want because ultimately agency is leading towards the IB or the goal of building independent thinkers, right? So how do we do that? This one is on the Padlet, but then there's one that's a little bit more advanced that you could work with. I don't know if you could, I think you could work with middle years, but you'd have to make one more advanced for your grade level in high school. What does agency look like at your age level, right? What are the outcomes that you're expecting, that the students are expecting, and what you're expecting, so that you co-create this experience. If you notice that the ones that I've shared with you, they're quite specific, right? They're targeting a skill. So here's where you can bring in those process standards that you're constantly worrying, am I going to teach them those skills, right? You can embed them in here and have that conversation. But then what about those kiddos who don't like to be constrained? They're very self-motivated and they just want to target, and then they'll craft their own path. How are we going to negotiate with them? So here's a possibility. It's more for primary, but I think you'll understand the point. Is like, what's the broad targets? What are we trying to get children to do? A child that's in elementary school, leaving elementary, that they can recognize their strengths and their weaknesses, that's huge, because that's owning my learning, that's owning my journey, and that's owning my mistakes and my shortcomings, and that it doesn't have to be a polished thing because I'm a work in progress. We're still works in progress, even as adults. So, are you going to allow some sort of success criteria to also be a little bit more broad? What do you think? Let's talk about it. Are you more feeling comfortable with something that's more structured, or do you think it would be easier to do one that's a little bit more loose and a little bit more broad? You can either chat or verbally or put into the chat room. What do you think? What do you prefer? Okay, well, Felipe, that tells me you can do either, right? All right. All right. So everyone's going to be different because of, because of their learning style. And that's something that we need to keep true to, right? Is that our learning style and also our situation. If we're not having agency in how we teach as educators, that's going to trickle down to our students. They're not going to feel that they have agency if you're stressed because someone's not giving you agency to teach the way you want to teach. Does that make sense? And so, oh, I love what Kirsten put. She likes thinking of agency as realizing what we have in internal power. And I think it connects to EQ to SEL. And that's really important. So true. And so I'm glad I'm seeing most people are saying that they're very much into the more looser option. Now, if you're looking for ways to scaffold agency, I've done a lot of research and found a lot of strategies that I've employed, and it's in this guide. This guide, Using Agency Daily. It's going to have all the posters and things I've showed you, okay? So that you can utilize them with your students. But you don't have to use what I have because it's my thinking, but it might springboard some ideas to help you with your students. So my question now is this. What are you going to start on Monday? What's one little thing that you can start to embed into your practice to bring about some agency into your classroom that we've talked about so far? Commit this to yourself. You don't have to tell me. So what's something that you can change to broaden the learning experience? So now what we're going to do is we're going to connect this with inquiry. Because if agency is the lens that we look at our students, well, what should our students then be able to do, right? How do we bring those two pieces together? So when I look at this picture, or I should ask you, when you look at this picture, how does this remind you of inquiry? I love it. Wake up and be in the moment, exploring, and we use our senses, it's searching. Oh, I like that, sniffing around and exploring without a definite destination. When I think of, the reason I chose this is because I think of my puppy. He is constantly exploring and sniffing everything, even if I don't want him to, right? But what I love about that is that every day he's sniffing in the same spots, trying to find something, a new experience. And so how are we getting our kids to constantly utilize different routines and whatnots, but still having that magic and wonder of inquiry? So when I think of inquiry, something that has made a powerful impression on me, being an IB educator, is I noticed in the last guide, Making the PYP Happen, that about 5 to 6 different places, whether it be lesson design, unit design, assessment, the written curriculum, any places where it was crucial, they kept mentioning these 5 terms. What is engaging, challenging, relevant, and significant. And I remember a few years ago, after having that aha moment, like, oh, if the IB is taking 5 times to relay these terms and give me this definition, maybe I should be paying attention to them. And maybe I should teach with them in mind. So at that time, I was, I taught 4th and 5th grade. And I taught my students as a success criteria before I knew what a success criteria was. I taught my students what these terms meant, and I had them posted on construction paper on the wall. And then I asked them to assess my teaching. Where could they find elements of engagement? Where could they find where they were challenged with new thinking, where they made relevant connections to their everyday lives, and how did it connect with the greater world beyond myself and beyond our little city? And so it challenged me to think from a different lens and to deepen the learning. So here's what I think these terms mean. I kind of wrote my own definitions per se, is that engaging is more than fun. It can be fun, but it's awakening our thinking and helping us to connect. It's turning on that light bulb to kids. And we're challenging misconceptions. We're going to and saying, you know what, kid, sorry, but what you've been learning for 3 years is not correct, right? So like when we teach in elementary school, when we're looking at comparatives and greater than, less than, in elementary school, we always say we eat the bigger number. That's how we know what's greater than. But what happens when they get into upper grades beyond elementary and there's no numbers to be eaten? There's variables. Now a child that's relied upon that misconception is now stuck because they haven't had years of practicing which way does less than and greater than go, right? And I'm a product of that. And I've had conversations with myself. Well, what idiot thought less than should go right? Shouldn't less than? Wouldn't that make sense? And so I get crossed, right? And that's a misconception that was in my brain that I've had to reteach myself. And I'm constantly having to reteach myself on a daily basis when I'm engaging with math. And it goes to a point of discomfort because now we're saying, here's the new way, the right way to do it. And that's uncomfortable for us. And relevance is how are we bringing in opportunities for children to engage with real life situations. And so we're going to practice this, okay? We're going to take a subject that is usually taught, that is, I think, relatively ignored. One lesson and it's done, okay? So in elementary school, that's where I reside, so I'm sorry this is an upper elementary example, but we talk about classifying properties of matter. And which one do you think is always skipped out of these three, or these four, sorry. So I'd be curious to see which one do you think is skipped or taught less? Wow, a lot of people are saying magnetism. Some solubility, some magnetism, but it looks like solubility and magnetism are neck and neck. I think, my personal opinion, I think the ones that I've been around a lot of educators is that they skip density because they don't quite understand how matter works, how mass works. Felipe is shaking his head because he knows, right? Yes, Georgina?
Yes,
Okay.
I think density is the one.
Yeah. And so we're going to do a little density activity, okay? So I'm going to walk you through what would be typical and then how is it inquiry, okay? So a typical density would be, okay, here's mass and here's volume. Mass is how much matter something takes, and then volume is the space that it holds, right? So like I've heard a lot of teachers say, you know, in a watermelon, all the red bits is the mass and the white and the rind is the volume, right? It's what's holding it together. Same with the peel of the orange. And that basically if you put a watermelon in water, it will always float because it's less dense than water. Have you guys ever done that? Where you've done an aquarium and put a watermelon inside of it and then it will float? No? So these are typical types of things where we'll drop different objects to check its density, right? One thing I didn't know that I recently discovered, that an orange will float, but the minute you take off its peel, it will sink because it's the porous nature of the actual peel that keeps it from sinking. But this is where it usually stops, right? We try to teach the content, try to relate it with the unit and move on. So I call this the topic cycle. We do a little experiment, we do a foldable or do an interactive notebook, then we assess it, and then we move on. And it's very difficult, I think, because they're compartmentalized portions of matter. So with inquiry, I think it's like, how do you bring all of those elements so they work together? Have any of you done that, where you've tried to bring some of the properties of matter and try to teach them together more conceptually? No? Okay. Because it is a challenge. All right, so here's what, but when we teach like this and we move on, we haven't answered the underlying question. Why do some things float while others don't? That's a key foundational question that kids are left with not understanding. What's the principle that's governing this, right? And that's where I think inquiry can go, where you're asking, it's about, I know that question asking is a lot about inquiry, but what questions are we asking, right? And how are we shaping it so that the kids can go towards an independent engagement? So here's an example of application of that water and floating, okay? So we've done the example of testing out, can it sink or float in fresh water? Now we're going towards a bigger pool of fresh water, which is a freshwater lake. So what are some possible questions that you could ask students to provoke their thinking based on this image? What's happening beneath the duck? I love that question. Another question could possibly be, why is the duck floating on the water and the girl isn't? You know, what's the difference, right? Why doesn't the duck sink? What would happen to the person without the inner tube? Love these questions. And so then we can go into the next level. We're showing a freshwater. Then we can go into, well, we've previously talked about solubility. We've talked about mixing solvents. Well, what happened? And you draw upon that prior knowledge and you're making connections. Well, looking at this place, the Great Salt Lake, what causes this salt to come into this lake, right? And in the early years, I love this, playing with water. It starts by switching it, what is available by water, and providing different type of water. That's how we do it. We start to build on prior knowledge. So where we're trying to go with this is looking at, you could ask the children, making relevant connections, because we're going back to that engaging, challenging, relevant and significant. You could ask them about different ways that they've engaged in a freshwater place, right? So that they're connected. Now, looking at this place, would you want to swim in this water that has anywhere between 5 to 27% salt? Okay. And what is going to be the difference of, can you swim? Will you float? Will you drown in this? So now next question can become, what's the connection between density and solubility? Because they've already explored solubility, now they can test out the same type of experiment by adding salt and other items to see about the density, okay? And if things will float or not. All right, someone brought in the Dead Sea that has a density, wow, of 240,000 kg, or wow, which makes or liters, which makes swimming in its water similar to floating. And that's where I'm going next. So now I'm thinking about water and how does it float, and thinking about why do certain places, why will a person float or not float? And you could take that little girl and go through this whole process. And now you introduce the Dead Sea. Now you're making significant connections. You're going around the globe and saying, let's look at these different places that exist. And what would it be like if we had 34% salt in this water? Okay. And could a person drown in this water? Is it possible? Right? If we can float. Then we come to the final place, which is in Antarctica, called Don Juan Pond. Did you know about this? 40% water, or 40% salt. And but you have to go into why is there, what does that mean if we put 40% salt into the water source? Okay, what's that going to look like? And how might how might you test density with temperature? Right? So this is a lot, right? But what we're trying to do is we're trying to build up that rigor and that muscle of answering questions and making connections. Because at the end, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be releasing it to an inquiry. So what should we do with this information? How is this connected to my real life, right? So now the students will go into groups and they're going to do something with this. How are they going to test this out? What's going to be their plan? Are they going to make simulations or models of these different types of water sources? Now it's making density a little bit more hands-on and applicable, that the more salt you add to the water, it's going to change the composition. Bottom line. That's the enduring understanding there. And why does that matter? And the reason why this matters is because any type of shipping vessel, they have to know the density, right? In relation to, because everything that we own comes on a shipping container, right? On a vessel. So how can we bring it back to real life, but also ask those questions so that they can inquire on their own? So what are your thoughts about that? Woo! Is that overwhelming, friends? Yeah? All right, Adriana, it's a little overwhelming, right? Okay. All right, always coming back to what should we do with it? I love that, Christine. What should we do with this information and how is it connected to real life? Why does this matter? And because it matters, because we need children to be able to take apart these big ideas and do something with them. So it's a lot of information, but I'm going to show you some simple tricks to eventually get yourself here. We have to know what the target is, but we start with baby steps, right? So one thing I want you to think about is this, is that as we're getting ready to close, is that when we do agency and we bring inquiry together, we're naturally differentiating. Because when you give open-ended tasks to students and they have their own success criteria and they're free to explore how they work, you're naturally differentiating according to their needs. You know what the learning target is. You set that learning target. This is what I expect at the end. But the process and the product that the children go through is going to be different. Each group, each child is going to be different. And that's okay, because they're eventually going to get to your end result. Okay. So how do we do this? So there are some tools on the Padlet, okay, that you can use. I created both of these. Toddle kind of reconfigured the strategies to facilitate inquiry during blended learning. I love both. There's more task cards in the Toddle version where you could print them out, put them on a key ring, and have kids utilize them. I think the inquiry thinking strategies, they're more of a list format for you as an educator. How am I going to utilize this as planning? So if you're looking at different simple ways of how to get to that target of building up that rigor, here's what it looks like. So basically in the inquiry thinking strategies packet that you have, you're going to have virtual engaging strategies and also some in-person engaging strategies that you can use with your kids to get them thinking and not wandering off, because it's a long time to sit at a computer. Then there's ones that challenge them, that make them think like, oh, look, the top one, setting learning goals against success criteria, giving them a little bit more ownership, creating learning checklists. Okay, what do I need to do in this inquiry, and how am I going to get there? Changing our growth mindset. Then when you go over to the relevant strategies, these are all strategies of, hey, how am I going to make this connected to me? Because I think that's oftentimes the missing link. They hear all this information coming in, but they have no connection to them. And that's what sticks. That's what stays for life. And so how can we build that up? And then the significant strategies are those of, how am I going to make this go beyond my school and my country? How can I make connections to beyond, right? So one strategy I love, amazing, and you could use it from early years all through high school, is Project Zero's projecting across distance. This is the most amazing routine. It's one of the brand new ones from Ron Richard and Mark Church in their book. And what it is this. You look at a situation. So let's say you looked at density, because that's the example shared. Well, what's the view of density in my town? Then if you're looking at states or territories near me, to the east of me and to the west of me, then you're looking beyond your country borders and going, okay, to the country north of me or south of me or east or west. Then, okay, now I'm going now into Europe and possibly Southeast Asia. And what are the different viewpoints on this one thing? Okay. And it really helps to frame everything. And so they're there for you to use. I'd be real interested in hearing how you think and if they help you. This is my contact details. It's also on the Padlet. This is a weird kind of dynamic, talking to no one, but I hope that this has helped you a little bit. Maybe just get a spark, some little idea of how you can start using some of agency and inquiry a little bit more into your practice.